We'll continue on with our series, True Christianity. In a lot of modern Christian things, it's kind of suffering is kind of downplayed, right? So it's just, we don't really want to talk about that. It's like Bruno, we just don't talk about it. It doesn't exist, and we try to just move on with our lives. But really, the core essence of Christianity is suffering. For the first century church, they didn't come to church because, hey, all my problems will be solved. I'll have finances to abundance. I'll have this and that. They didn't do that. They did it because they were a community who believed that God was doing something. That's really what it was about. And, just a whole different idea than a lot of times we see on a lot of more public representations of Christianity. I remember when I was a kid, and the day I figured out that there are mean people in the church. See, growing up, my mom and my dad were pastors in California. Whew. California. Sorry, I still get shivers. It's like on Lion King, Mufasa. California. But I remember the day that I figured out that there are mean people in church. It should have clued me out in California, but we moved to New Mexico and we started going to church there. And there was this woman there that I unfortunately was related to. Because when you're related to them, you can't really get away from it. You're just kind of sunk. You can choose a lot of things in life. You cannot choose the people that were born from other people. And this woman always had this nasty attitude. She was one of those people who had a permanent scowl on their face. You know how when you think of some people, you think, oh, that's a person who does this. That's a person who does this, Like when I think of Christine, I think of someone who has laid down their life to serve other people with zero recognition. That's what I think of when I think of Christine. When I think of Paul, I think of somebody who drops everything at the drop of a hat. When I think of Fabi, I think of somebody who genuinely cares about people. These are the things that I think of in these people, right? When I think of Simon, I think of someone who always wants to be recognized. Just kidding, Simon, I'm joking. But when I think of, when you thought of this person, this was one of those people where as soon as you thought of them, you thought, oh boy, she's on the prowl, You'd see her come to a church thing, you're like, who's she after now? Whose blood does she want to devour? And, she had an opinion on everything, which is fine. Do you know what the difference is between being contentious and not contentious? Everybody has an opinion, but a contentious person has to constantly share it all the time. So it was fine that she had an opinion. The problem was that when she had an opinion on everything, her mouth was always open. There was no, filter. And, always complaining. She was always offended at the pastor, offended at the people, offended at the things we did. We did it wrong. I wasn't even the pastor there. I wasn't even the associate excuse me. I wasn't even the associate pastor there. And I still felt pity for these. I pity the food they had to pass in that church because, oh, man, she really made it difficult for them. And everything was an insult. It didn't matter what you said. It was an insult. She would interpret it in the worst light possible. Kind of like being married. Just kidding. So what we did as kids, okay, we had this perfect system. It was to simply try to avoid her as hard as we possibly could. And then if someone got stuck in her path, we just left them. It didn't matter how close of friends we were, that was it. If you guys have ever seen A Christmas Story, the part where the bully keeps, being a bully, and he corners them at the school or in the alley, and when that person gets caught, see ya, buddy. You should have been quicker. And that was kind of how we viewed this woman. She was something. And the thing is, that's not what God has for us. He doesn't want us to be those mean, nasty people. I think sometimes we just kind of lose sight of the grace that we've been given. And so we abandoned them to their fate, and we'd run away and be thankful that it wasn't us. And we'd go home and do our prayers. Now I lay me down to sleep. Please, God, don't let it be me next time. And some of us genuinely tried. There were a couple of us that genuinely tried to do everything right. We tried not to cause her offense, tried to, step around her, tried to walk on the eggshells. We genuinely did try. Not all of us, but there were a couple of us. But the thing was, that still wasn't enough for this woman. She would hunt us down. And, oh, goodness. Sometimes you're dealing with a person in your life and you think, man, I just really, really, really wish I didn't have to. But there's always going to be those people. And, the thing with suffering as a Christian, you're going to suffer for a lot of different things. You're going to suffer in life by being alive. You're going to suffer, from family members. You're going to suffer in ministry. You're going to suffer in serving God. It's just that the more you obey God and seek God, the more suffering you're going to take on. And we expect the suffering from the world, but when it's suffering within the body, we think, well, that's gone too far. Remember that Jesus' number one adversary were people that he agreed on almost every single point of doctrine. Jesus and the Pharisees saw eye to eye on most every doctrine and teaching. Not all of them, but most of them. But yet, they were his biggest opponent. Never forget that. So, there's nasty people everywhere, obviously. It's not like, the church is full of a bunch of hypocrites. The world is full of a bunch of hypocrites. But with that being said, in church, it seems like they hurt you more. You're expecting maybe a higher standard because, it's family. And for many of us, this is the only family we know. The church is and should always be a collection of people that would not have otherwise been associated. Hopefully that's the idea. You should have every social class, every color. You should have everything in the church. If it's in the community, it should be in the church. And you should have ex-druggies. You should have ex-alcoholics. You should have people who used to be adulterers and idolaters. That's who should be here. And but when you commit yourself to a group and they fail that standard, it's a little maybe hurts a little bit more. And I've noticed, you can disagree with me on this point, but I've noticed that it seems like people who get hurt in church or who cause harm in church, it seems like they're maybe a little bit more entitled. You know what I mean? Like, we can in our own house know, hey, this is unacceptable behavior. But something happens when we come into a church and we just kind of flip that off. You know what I mean? I don't have to be polite. I don't have to, take care on this stuff. And so people will do things that upset us, and we just kind of blow it out of proportion, try not to rectify it. I'm just not going to that church anymore because they hurt my feelings. I mean, my wife's hurt my feelings too. I'm still married to her, right? That happens in life. You're going to get your feelings hurt. But there's this idea, I'm just more entitled. I've been here for longer, so you need to walk around me. You know how much money I've given to this church? So everybody needs to tread lightly. And it's like, well, that's not really the idea of being a Christian. When we read in the book of Acts, we see this guy, his name's Barnabas, and he gives away everything he has, and doesn't expect anything in return. Then he goes off and he's a missionary. I mean, I think that's kind of more of the model of Christianity. So the main idea that I want you to get from today is a lot of things we're going to be looking at, mostly about suffering, because that's true Christianity, is being called to suffer. The main idea that I want you to get, though, is suffering comes, okay? But here's the thing. Don't play the victim. Don't play the victim. Suffering's going to come. Don't play the victim. And I do want to very quickly mention a difference. There's a difference between playing the victim and not being okay with unacceptable behavior, right? So, here's a good example. If one of y'all hoodlums gets tired of one of my hoodlums and goes over there and smacks him or something, that's crossing a line. You know what I mean? Like, that's my kid. It doesn't matter if I'm the pastor or whatnot. You're not doing that to my kid. See what I mean? You guys kind of get what I'm saying? Like, that's crossing a line there. But then playing the victim would be like, oh man, so-and-so did this. Maybe Daniel did something that hurt my feelings, and it's okay. People who are going to hurt your feelings, you move on. So we're going to look at 1 Peter chapter 4. This is what it says, okay? We looked at this last week. We're going to look at it again. Dear friends, don't be surprised when the fiery ordeal comes among you to test you, as if something unusual were happening to you. Instead, rejoice as you share in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may also rejoice with great joy when his glory is revealed. If you are ridiculed for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or a meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in having that name. I mentioned this, I think it was last week. The most conflict in the church is because we want to be treated better than Jesus was treated. That's going to be the source of almost 100% of your conflict in church. For the time has come for judgment to begin with God's household. And if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who disobey the gospel of God? This is something in America we really get backwards. We want to talk about judgment on the world and how God's wrath on the world and how they deserve all the... Yeah, okay, I got that. But what this said is the punishment and the judgment starts in God's household. Everybody can do a good job of pointing out everybody else's sin. But in the house of God, it's, Lord, show me my sin. Right? I can easily go out into Roswell and find sinners. But the problem is there's a sinner here too. See what I mean? And when you put yourself on that pedestal, you're just asking to be knocked off. And if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who disobey the gospel of God? And if a righteous person is saved with difficulty, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? So then let those who suffer according to God's will entrust themselves to a faithful Creator while doing what is good. So in your life as a Christian, you're going to struggle with one of two areas. Typically, you're not going to struggle with both of these. You're going to struggle with one or the other, normally. The first area you're going to suffer is probably how you treat them. And them can be anybody. People in the church or in the world or whoever it is that you don't like. And the second struggle is going to be how they treat you. You will typically have one that you struggle with more than the other. If your struggle with is how you treat them, then the problem you're going to have is it's going to be a constant struggle for you to choose to take up your cross and die to yourself. It's going to be a constant struggle because you are going to want to have it your way. You're going to want the church to be run your way. You're going to want people in the church to do it your way. You're going to want people to volunteer. You're going to want to stick your nose in every single thing, and you're going to want to always have everybody doing it your way. And you think, in your head, you think something like this, I'm not demanding, I just want this, right? But the thing about being demanding and controlling is it's never enough, and you always need more. You always need to demand and control more. And you think, you get in your head, if I could just fix this, my problems would be solved. And so you keep doing it. And you see it happening in your marriage maybe, where if I could just get my spouse to do this or to act like this. And so then you start being more and more pressuring and not realizing that you're causing unnecessary conflict in your marriage because you're constantly trying to push and control. And it doesn't really work like that. But if your struggle is how they treat you, then your real big problem is going to be learning how to be a suffering servant like Christ was, where you can genuinely do it for their best interest. When I correct somebody, I'm not doing it for me. I'm not doing it to win an argument. I'm doing it for their best interest. When I am doing this, volunteering for this, it doesn't matter if I don't get recognized. That's all right. It doesn't matter how long I've been at this church. It doesn't matter how much money I've given. I'm a suffering servant. That's what I'm here for. And so your real big problems there is going to be getting bitter. You're either going to struggle with getting bitter or having everything your way. Those are the two areas you're always going to struggle with suffering. So let's look back at verse 14. It says this, if you are ridiculed for the name of Christ, you are blessed because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. A lot of times we suffer, but it's not really for the name of Christ. It's just because, we'll get to that in a second. When we suffer, especially in the church, we understand that from the world we're going to get suffering. We expect it. But something happens when it actually does happen, and we get kind of saucy about it. You know what I mean? Oh, we're going to have suffering in this life, and then something will happen on the news where maybe a baker is being sued because of his refusal to make a cake or something like that. Different things like that. And I mean, we knew that different sufferings of different kinds were going to happen, and rights were going to get trampled. Everybody knew it. We all know that across the world people are dying for their faith in Jesus. But then we kind of make ourselves the victims, and woe is me. We were suffering so hard. It's just like not really. I mean, we don't have that bad. Keep in mind that this is not our home. It's a temporary place that we're living in. And so we always talk about the suffering in the world, but then as soon as the smallest suffering happens, we go to pieces and we get all upset about it. The thing I've noticed from suffering is that suffering from the world looks like two different things, and we talk about the first one a lot, okay? How you're going to suffer from the way that the world treats you. They're going to maybe take away your rights and your property and all these different things. Okay, all right, we're not there in America yet, but in the rest of the world, they pretty much are. And so, yeah, this is going to happen, these sufferings. But the suffering that we don't really talk about is there is going to be a suffering that you endure as a Christian just from living in an immoral culture. We have gotten really used to talking about America as our permanent home. And so because of that, we oftentimes don't talk about the immorality in America. And remember that our home is not here. No matter how good the American dream is, was, or will be, it will never be heaven. It will never compete. Not even in the same ballpark. Nothing will be as equal there. See what I mean? So here we look at in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7, it says this, talking about Lot, it says, distressed by the depraved behavior of the immoral. The culture around you should bother you. That doesn't mean you should rant and rave and gripe and complain. That means you should be a light. But it should bother you. So let's move on from there. That's the suffering from the world. But then we get to verse 15. Look what it says here. Let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or a meddler. Which it always makes me laugh that meddler is thrown in there with thief and murderer. Because, I mean, there's some things in the church that are just kind of, it's okay. We know that there's sins. It's okay that we do them. I can be prideful and arrogant, and you can't teach me anything because I'm a Christian. I can gossip and complain because I'm a Christian. It's okay. You know, we have like this idea of these are the okay sins and these are the not okay sins. And then here we have Peter throwing a wrench in everything by just making it all impossible. You mean I can do the whole not killing people most of the time, but this whole meddler thing now, now you're crossing a line, Peter. Sometimes we suffer, but we suffer as a consequence for our own actions. I'm going to give you two very quick examples. The first one is we'll get into a bad relationship, a relationship we had no business being in, with people that the Bible again tells us not to get with this person, right? So like Proverbs will say, hey, watch out for this kind of a person. But we'll say, oh, but I love them. And so the St. Corinthians will say, don't be unequally yoked. Make sure you're both believers. But I can change them. Oh, the arrogance in our voices, right? Oh, give me 10 years. I can rework this person into who they ought to be. Wow, good luck with that. And so then the relationship obviously ends. Duh. And we do something like this. God, how could you let this happen? And then we go to pieces. It's somehow God's fault. And then another 3 or 4 years later, we get another bad relationship. And somehow that one's going to be God's fault too. I don't know how, but somehow it's going to be God's fault. And, that's a real good example of suffering for the consequences of our own actions. But that's not the only example I have. I remember when I was a kid, okay, we had this cat, but it was one of those cats where you can't really ever say that you had it. You can't really ever claim ownership on it. You know the cat I'm talking about? This is the world's meanest tomcat that you've ever experienced. And this is California, okay? So the rats out there are about yay big, so you can imagine what the cats are, okay? And so they go out, and you could hear them fighting all night. One time he comes home, and his eyeball's hanging out. And this is a mean cat. He's always out there fighting. So my sister gets tired of this cat being mean. And so she gets this great idea that she's going to show this cat what for. Now, keep in mind we were kids, okay? All right? You can't hold the guilty parties still guilty. It's been over 7 years. Let it go, okay? So she decides that she's going to tell this cat what for. So she grabs it by the tail. You already see where I'm going with this, don't you? And she decides to swing it in the air and then throw it. Okay, so you already see exactly where this is going. Now, with that, hold on, before I go any further in the story, that cat would have scratched her anyways. Okay, it was going to happen anyways. But she just ensured that it happened right now by grabbing that cat by the tail. So she flings it. It comes running after her like, oh man, boom. Have you seen Flash on those Marvel comics? Or I can't really even. It is really fast. Okay, Sonic the Hedgehog. How about that? Boom. Comes chasing after her. So she tries to hightail it up the. We had this tree fort. Okay, so she tries to start hightailing it up there. Well, the cat comes like flying out, like a monster from a horror movie, flying through the air, grabs on and just starts swiping and biting, and so then she, oh goodness, and I'm just sitting there like minding my own business, like I hope this doesn't spill over. That's not foreshadowing; it didn't spill over. We're good. And so my sister decides to just kick this cat in the face. It flies off the ladder and it just lands there and does this thing. If you've ever had a rooster attack you and you hit it with something to get it to back off, they do this thing with, like, they're really trying to, like, what happened? We were fighting, I think, and now I woke up. You should see the other guy. And, so trying to get his bearings, and then he does the most boss thing I've ever seen a cat do. He gets his bearings. He looks around, like, looking to see if his homies see or whatever, and then he just saunters off. I'm not making this up. I am not making this up. He acted like he won the fight. Now, obviously, that would be a good example of, suffering as a consequence of our own actions. But in this verse here, he says all these things that we all know are bad things, murderer, thief, and evildoer. But then he gets to this last one, a meddler. And the thing about meddlers is I feel like they're not oftentimes given their due. Let me say it like that. Okay? A meddler, another word for meddler is a busybody. These are people who care deeply. There's this idea that meddlers they just like to be in control, or they just like to make people miserable, or whatever. No. We like to demonize people who irritate us. You know what I mean? Meddlers aren't bad people. Now, it doesn't matter really if they're bad people or not. I'm just saying that's not the issue. The issue is that they care deeply. Meddlers are people who genuinely care, and they care deeply. And they're not usually bad people, but that's not really the issue. And so it brings up an interesting question of, okay, so what really is a meddler? How can we define a meddler? And we're going to look at a broad definition, and we're going to look at a more specific definition. The thing I want to get across, so before I get to the definitions, is a meddler is not someone who helps without being asked. Okay, a meddler is not someone who helps without being asked. That's not a meddler. Okay, a busybody isn't someone who wants to be included in things. Okay, what makes someone a meddler or a busybody is that they always want to take control. It's not their business, but they want to take control. Now, obviously, we probably all have meddlers in our families. You guys just had Thanksgiving. And Christmas is coming. So we all have meddlers in our families. Chances are, if you've been in the church longer than, a couple days, this church or any other church, you've probably encountered meddlers in your ministry, meddlers in volunteer work. People who always want to take control. It happens. It happens. One of the things that's not really talked about is the way that pastors have a tendency to be meddlers. They have a tendency to stick their fingers in things where they shouldn't be sticking their fingers. When I came here, I've been here for like half of a year. Okay, since I came here, I've had 5 different people coming to me and trying to talk their way out of something that I wasn't even going to reprimand them for. Oh, let me give you an explanation. This is why I did this. And I was like, it's fine. Like it's fine. Like, I'm not your mom, and I'm not your dad. Like, my job is to encourage you in ministry. It's to give guidance and direction. But that doesn't mean I'm going to nitpick you. That doesn't mean that every single thing that you do that I don't like, I'm going to talk to you about. That's not how pastoring works. My job isn't to sit over your back and tell you all the things you're doing wrong. That's not my job. Okay? I'm here to help you get involved in ministry and to fulfill ministry in your life. I'm here to correct immoral things. Immoral things. Not things that, I had one person, you need to tell this person to do this and to do this. And I said, have you talked to this person? Well, no. Why is this being taken to me? Like, you all need to figure out your own issue here. Like, this isn't something you need me helicopter pastoring on. And, there's just a little bit of I think maybe a little bit of confusion there about roles. But the thing I want to talk about, and let's look at the first definition, and we'll get to the second thing. A meddler is someone who takes supervision of affairs pertaining to others and in no wise to himself. That's a good definition. The issue here isn't a helpful person or a person who cares. The issue is someone who's trying to take control. And you're going to know if you do this because look at the relationship that you have with your children. Okay, when they're kids, you can give them spankings and pep talks and all that. When they get to be teenagers, things get a little more dicey. And then when you get to be young adults, now you got to kind of loosen your grip because they are their own person. And then they're going to go marry somebody, and they're going to have their own family, and you are now the extended family. It's a shifting of roles that happens. And that's difficult. I had one guy who, he was having a lot of problems with his parents. And he was going for a while, saying all the things that they were doing wrong. And I said, "How old are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm 22." And I said, "Well, you're an adult. You should probably go ahead and move out. It's time for you to make your own way in life. Go get your own job, get your own house." There's a conflict there because there's these two households, and they're both trying to live as one household. It's not going to work. It's just that's not how God designed it. There's supposed to be that breaking away. And so look at the relationship you have with your adult children, and that will tell you if you are a meddler. It will. 9 out of 10 times. Not always, but usually. Unless you're able to somehow keep your kids so under your thumb that they just have no ability to voice anything, then that's a whole different issue. But so how does being a meddler apply to our relationship with the world and suffering from the world? Well, that takes us to our second definition. And this is from Thayer, who did the Thayer's Greek lexicon. He's a very well-known scholar. "With holy zeal, meddle with affairs of non-believers to make them conform to Christianity." Boy, if that is not a poignant, is that the right word, definition of the American church today. That's all we do. We get involved in every single aspect of Americans' life, trying to make everybody always conform to the Christian standard. People in the world are going to sin because they're sinners. Our job isn't to turn them into Republicans or Democrats or this or that or the other thing, or to do anything like that. Our job is to lead people to Jesus. And when people come to Jesus, Jesus has a way of changing what needs to change. And so there's some things that are going to matter to you. They're going to be like a conviction or maybe your own opinion, and it's just not really going to matter in the grand scheme of things. You know what I mean? Like there's going to be points when the culture says, "Hey, this is really important, and you better hop on this train." It's not as important a deal as they make it out to be. Like the thing that's going on right now in our culture, if you really love people, you're going to support everything with transgender. That's a real big hot topic in our culture. That's really going to matter to them. Well, when people get saved, things just have a matter of changing. Our character changes, our viewpoints change. We don't really have to get people to come to our way of thinking. We need to get people to turn to Jesus. With holy zeal, they meddle with affairs of non-believers to make them conform to Christianity. That's meddling. We are not called to meddle as the church. We're not called to meddle as Christians. That's not what we are called to do. We are to be the light, and there's a huge difference there. So let's keep plowing forward. We get to 1 Peter chapter, I think we're still in chapter 4, but we can go backwards to verses 8 through 9. It says this: "Above all, maintain constant love for one another, since love covers a multitude of sins." Why would he have said that unless they were having fights? Right? If I said, "Hey, forgive your spouse," well, it wouldn't really mean anything if you aren't in a fight with your spouse. You know what I mean? "Above all, maintain constant love for one another in the church, since love covers a multitude of sins." Did you know that I'm going to sin against you? Did you know that you're going to sin against me? Since I've been here, I have had repeated conflicts with some people. That's all right. You forgive, you move on. If it needs to be addressed, you address it. But 9 out of 10 times, I will say this, 9 out of 10 times it doesn't have to be addressed. 9 out of 10 times, either they're going to grow, they're going to know that they did it themselves, or the issue just resolves itself. When I first got here, I remember there's this one guy who really wanted me to take care of this one situation. He said, "This person needs this to happen." First off, it was none of his business. And I told him so. I said, "Well, that's not really your job." The second thing is that issue completely resolved itself all by itself. It didn't need somebody helicoptering. It didn't. And sometimes we get real in our heads. We go, we got to fix this right now. It's like, no, you don't. Some suffering comes from the church. So we've looked at suffering comes from the world. It comes from our own actions. It comes from the church too. In 2 Corinthians 11:26, it says this: "I face dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from and he's a Jew. He's talking about the Jewish people. Dangers from my own people, dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers at sea, and dangers among false brothers." How in the world do you know if somebody's a false brother? You don't. In fact, Jesus even tells this parable, and he says that there's the wheat and the tares, the wheat and the fake wheat. It's both growing next to each other. And then what do we do? And the master says, leave it. Leave it until the end, and we'll separate it at the end. you can't really tell the difference. You can't tell if somebody's genuinely saved or if someone is struggling in their faith. Sometimes somebody is genuinely saved, they're just struggling, which is why Hebrews tells us that God is able to distinguish between the joints and the marrow, the thoughts and intentions of the heart, because God sees the true person. What we see is we see people who are struggling, and then we rush to a conclusion they're not saved, but that's not always true. And then when you go to chapter 2, it says, For it brings favor if because of a consciousness of God, someone endures grief from suffering unjustly. Here's the thing. Well, let's keep going. For what credit is there if when you do wrong and are beaten, you endure it? But when you do what is good and suffer, if you endure it, this brings favor with God. For you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. So here's the thing, okay? You have suffering from the world, suffering from your own actions, suffering from the church. You're just going to have suffering all around in life. Okay, all right. But here we get to another thing. The suffering from God. God calls you to suffering. We get it in our head something like this. God hates me. God just wants to kill me. God wants to make me miserable. He doesn't care. He's just there trying to pick on me. We go through all these kinds of things when we go through suffering. None of that's true. And I wish there was an easy answer, but there really isn't. It's something you have to grow through your problem. There's no easy answer that I can give you. But I can say this. God calls you to suffering, and here's the little thing that's going to be on the screen. Your suffering has purpose. So the church is going to cause you to suffer. Your actions are going to cause you to suffer. But God isn't necessarily causing you to suffer so much as he's calling you to suffering. There's a purpose in the suffering that God brings you to and brings you through as well. So then we get to 1 Peter chapter 5, and Peter's going to mention one more thing that causes suffering in our life. Be sober-minded, be alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for anyone he can devour. You know, if we would just remember this verse and realize that Satan is always seeking for an opportunity to tear us down and destroy us, I think we'd be a lot happier in life, because we'd see all the bad news that we get and all the bad things that we go through as an opportunity to either praise God or move to despair. Everything that you're going through is an opportunity to praise God or move to despair. Everything. It doesn't matter who caused it, why it's happening. It doesn't matter. It's all an opportunity. Everything in your life. So then we get to verse 9. It says this, resist him, Satan, firm in the faith, knowing that the same kind of sufferings are being experienced by your fellow believers throughout the world. Everybody knows what it means to suffer. And everybody is suffering from Satan. Everybody. I've talked to quite a few Wiccans and different people in those kinds of circles, and they like to talk about the good positive energy and how they feel so at peace and all these different things, and then you get to the dark side of it. Oh yeah, I also have demons in my bedroom. I also have constant nightmares that wake me up in the middle of the night. I have poor health. I have bad relationship with everybody, but I sense these positive vibes, and I've got these healing crystals. Oh, okay, so don't you think that maybe your healing crystals aren't quite paying the cost of dealing with the demons? Wouldn't it be better to just get rid of the demons in the first place? Like, doesn't that seem like a better option? Well, nobody's life is perfect. No, I'm not saying my life is perfect, but I am saying I don't ask problems into my life, I don't gamble because I already have problems and I don't want any more problems. I don't drink. There's no alcohol in my house except for NyQuil. And the reason for that is because I personally I'm not looking for more problems in my life. I've got enough things on my mind, okay? I don't need any more. So all these different things that cause you to suffer, Satan, he doesn't have the power to control you. He doesn't have the power to make you suffer, okay? But he seeks opportunity. He seeks opportunity. If something's going wrong in your life, he's going to be there. He's going to whisper little things in your head. You don't matter anyways. God never liked you anyways. You're not good enough to find favor with God. You do your job so badly that this is all your fault. The reason why your kids messed up, it was you. You weren't a good enough parent. You weren't there enough. You didn't say all the right things enough. You know how it is. I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard. That's how Satan works. He's going to look for any opportunity of you in a weakened state, and he's going to go crazy. Now, something that I think is important to say is that Satan doesn't cause everything bad. Satan does not cause everything bad. He doesn't. There's this idea that Satan is the one behind every bad thing. Sin comes from our choice, and we choose to not obey God. That's us. When you cut somebody off the other day on the road, that was you that did that. Satan didn't do that. You did that. Satan can tempt us. He can do that, but he's not behind every single bad thing that happens in the world. And the main thing I want you to get from that is you as a Christian, take constant care that you are not being used as Satan's tool. Christians unwittingly every single week are being used by Satan to sow discord in the church. Every single week. You do it by the things that you say, the complaining that you do. You do it by going behind other people's backbiting them, gossiping. Those are things where you're being used by Satan. Satan is using you to tear up the church. I've been involved in a lot of ministry over a lot of churches in multiple countries. And one thing I have never seen is I've never once seen a homosexual destroy a church. Never once. I have seen countless Christians who've been saved over 30 years tear a church apart with gossip. I have seen that multiple times. About 6 times, personally. That's not including the times that I've heard from my pastor friends where they're talking about somebody who can't just close their mouth. Well, which one deserves the more attention? The one that everybody's doing or the one that 7% of the population does? Well, I think that the answer is pretty obvious. The devil didn't make you do it, but take great care that you're not being used as a tool, as a pawn. Now, I also do need to say this before we kind of get ready to wrap things up here. This doesn't mean that the devil made you do it. This doesn't mean that there's a spirit of this or that made you do it. Oh, there's a spirit of Jezebel. There's a spirit of jealousy. There's a spirit of this, and it's making me do it. No. You are responsible for your actions. You chose to do it. I remember I was talking with this one woman, and she was talking about how, I did that because, man, there's just so much things. We make up so many crazy things because we don't read the Bible. There was this one couple that bought their kid a Ouija board and said that it didn't affect our household because we did it in ignorance. So when the prophet says, because of lack of knowledge my people perish, that doesn't mean anything? Like, all these different things, we just come up with off-the-wall things. And this woman that I was talking to, she, Satan just really tricked me on that. It's like, Satan didn't trick you on anything. You kept your mouth open, and as Proverbs says, if your mouth is open too long, something bad's going to come out. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it says. Go read the book of Proverbs. So suffering does come in our life. It's oftentimes made worse by the things we or others do. It's also made worse when we obey God. It's made worse when we serve more. The more you serve, the more you love, the more you obey God, the more you'll suffer. And this is a good thing. We'll look at that next week, but just take my word for it. But there are some things that we oftentimes call suffering that are not suffering. Okay, suffering is not having a job. You don't know how many times I've heard people say this, oh, I'm really suffering by going to work. You are blessed if you have a job. Your boss might be a pain. Your coworkers might be a pain. But if you have a job, you are blessed, especially in this economy. Holy smokes, if you have a job, you are super blessed. So work is not, and you know the thing is, Adam and Eve, before the sin in the garden, they had a job to do. And the Bible says that when we go into the new heavens and new earth, we're going to have a job to do. We're not going to just sit around twiddling our thumbs playing harps. Like I don't even like the harp. Anyways, that's not suffering. Suffering is not getting cut off on the road. Suffering is not losing your parking space or somebody at church taking your seat. That's not suffering. Suffering is not when things change at your church. That's not suffering. Suffering is when you endure evil with a good attitude. Anybody can do a ministry in the church, but only a special kind of person can do the same ministry every single day with a good attitude. When I first got here, there was a person that wanted me to take action because they didn't think that somebody was doing their job the way that they wanted them to do it. It wasn't that they were doing a bad job, so they weren't doing it. Okay? So, it wasn't this guy's business at all. And I told him, I said, yeah, some things are going to change, but I mean, that's probably not going to be one of them. And I really don't think that this seems like a conversation that you need to have that include that person in. And he got a little bit upset, obviously. But the thing is, and I'm sorry, Melissa, for putting on the spotlight. It was Melissa. He was saying that Melissa should not have her job. Well, let me tell you about Melissa. Melissa's been here doing her job for a long time. And she's done it faithfully. And I walked in a couple months back, and I will never forget this. I walked in, and the youth were doing worship. And Melissa walked in, and there she was worshiping. It didn't matter if she wasn't on the stage. She was there, and she was worshiping. That is what I value as a pastor. That's what I value. I don't value people knowing the most or having the most experience. I don't care about that. I care about the heart. And that revealed the person's heart. Meanwhile, that person who was convinced that Melissa needed to this or Melissa needed to that, where are they now? They're not here. See, I mean, dust in the wind, whereas the person who gives it their all. There's a big difference there. And as a pastor, you have to give attention to the things that actually matter. That is a good example of suffering. When you have everybody telling you you're doing your job wrong, that they want you to do it like this, or they want you to do it like this, or this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to do, and you stick with it anyways. So, really, Melissa, great job. So changes happen for a reason. We're not just going to change things just to irritate people. Changes have to be to fill a need. Okay? So I'm not going to change things to get my way, but we are going to be changing a couple things. A lot of times people want to change things just to change things, like moving stuff. When I got married, maybe you guys have experienced this phenomenon. I wanted all my furniture in the right spots, the perfect, prime, optimal spots. Okay? You don't move from that spot, that's where it stays. Which, by the way, kids and hardwood floors are terrible because they always move things. No, this is a spot where it goes. Okay? That's me. I get married to Gracie, and she's like, okay, it's been a couple months, let's move the furniture around. I'm like, whoa! Calm down. This is the optimal position for all these things. You need to calm down. Well, the changes of life. And what I'm getting at here is sometimes people just like to change things. That's not why we're going to be changing things in the church. Okay, we're going to be changing things for a reason. When I get rid of things and move out a lot of the clutter, it's going to be so that we can have more attention on fewer things. Do you ever go to a really good seafood place? And do you know what they don't have there? Hamburgers or enchiladas. Do you know why? Because they do seafood really well. We as a church are not going to do everything. We're going to dedicate ourselves to doing some things really well. So when I declutter things, it's not because I hate tradition. It's because there's a lot of space that's not being used because it's being cluttered with things that we don't use. So if we get it out of there, we can move it with something that we do use. I mentioned last week we're going to get rid of this giant table in the back. Why? Because we're going to be putting in a kids' activity booth there. See, we're moving something out that's taking up too much space to put something in that's needed. See what I mean? These are the kinds of changes we're going to make. We're not just going to try and irritate people. If you have a concern about something, please let me know. I am more than willing to listen, okay? That doesn't mean that we're not going to do it, but I will listen, okay? I'm not just coming in here high-handed. I'm asking people their opinions. We're going on stuff, but there will be changes that happen. That's just something that happens in churches. It happens in your life. Look back over your own house in the past 10 years. Is everything in the exact same spot? No. Things get moved. They change. When your kids move out, that's no longer a kid's room, right? It's the exact same idea. So, another thing is, when you have fewer programs, that means less people in the church will be burned out, which means you get more newcomers. Do you know how tiring it is to go into a church and you walk in and everybody's just tired? Because they're all doing ministries all the time. They never get a break. All the time. They have to do the same thing week in and week out. I get exhausted just looking at those people. I think, oh, man, you guys need to take a break. Just sit down for a little bit. Sit down. And that's exactly what happens. People come in, they say everybody overtaxed, and they think, I'm not getting in that. Nope. I'm not doing that. So what can we possibly take away from all this? Well, I think that there's one thing that I really, really, really want to emphasize from all of these things in 1 Peter and the things that we looked at. If you're going to suffer, if you're going to run the race of life, of the Christian walk, if you're going to suffer, if you're going to fight the good fight. Don't just fight. Don't just run a race. Run the right race. Don't just suffer for doing what's right. Anybody can grab a cat by the tail and swing it in the air. Anybody can suffer. But when you suffer for doing what's right, that's different. See, it says that God blesses those who suffer for doing what's right. And you say, but I can't handle it. It breaks my heart. I understand. Thankfully, heaven is in the heart repairing business. And when we get there, it won't be the heaviness that you carry with you in your life won't follow you there. I remember my great-grandpa, I've mentioned this multiple times, my great-grandpa planted churches all across the nation. If you go through Mescalero, that Apache Assembly of God, he built that. The one in Tularosa, right on the corner, Tularosa Community Church, he built that. He had depression from the, I don't know how soon he had it, but he died with depression. He doesn't have depression now. Like, it's okay. You're going to go through suffering in life. But when you do this, make sure that you're suffering for the right things. You're running the right race. You're fighting the good fight. Don't fight because you're quarreling. You can't get along with other people. You nitpick. You're always fighting change. Suffer for doing what's good. Suffer for doing what's right. Okay? I know that in the past some things might have happened that maybe upset you. I'm asking that you just let it go. Some of you are going to remember some harm that was done 5, 10, 15 years ago. I wasn't here. If I tread on you, I genuinely am sorry. It's not something I am intentionally doing. But I'm also asking that you meet me in the middle and let go of the things that happened 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. It's in the past. I'm sorry that happened to you. We're moving forward as a church. I was reading a book by John Maxwell this morning, and he said that his church was growing so fast that they had to get involved in this building project. And we're closing out here. I'm sorry that I'm going so long. His church was involved in this growing project. Cost over $1 million. Because of this growth, he lost 15% of the people that were going there. 15% of the people left because the church was growing. So then they tried to build a new building. His key giver got upset because they didn't hire him. So he left. These are the kinds of petty things that we allow in church where we just expect things our way. Things are going to change. It's not always going to be the way that you want it to. That's okay. It's not going to always be the way that I want it to be either. I have never once been involved in any change in a church where everything went my way. Never once. And you're not either. I know this is scary for you because this is your church. You've been here longer. You have superiority. I understand that. Unfortunately, that's going to have to change. You're going to have to go through something that's scary. You're going to be like Israel wandering in the wilderness. But I guarantee you, if you make it past the next 5 years, you'll be good. If you can get to the next 5 years without turning into gossip, you'll be good. You'll be in clear. Just 5 years. Hold out that long, right? 5 years? You went 5 years? Huzzah! Lord, I just pray you bless those who are here today. I pray you give us guidance and direction. Lord, I pray you'd give me wisdom as I lead this church forward, knowing that it's your church and not mine. Lord, I pray you'd put a barrier, a bit in our mouths, that we wouldn't shoot off our mouths saying stupid things, but that we'd be here for each other and continue to be a family like you've called us to be. God, I pray that you would open our eyes and help us to lean into things that you want to happen. God, I pray you grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, even as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Thank you, Lord.